So Final Fantasy VII Rebirth is only just over a week away now, and I'm sure you're all aware, but for those who aren't, the demo has been out since the 6th of February, where we can play the first few hours of the game, and that actually carries over to the main game. And so now that I've spent plenty of time playing, to give you guys a bit of a head start once the game actually launches, we're going to go over all of the basics you need to know when it comes to the combat in Final Fantasy VII Rebirth. Now, before we get into it, keep in mind this is just for, I guess, newer plays. If you've played Final Fantasy VII Remake, then you probably know a fair chunk of this stuff already because the combat is very similar through that game. But towards the end of the video, there are still some elements that have only just been introduced in Rebirth, so some of this will be pretty much relatively new to every single person watching. Now, getting into, I guess, the basics of the combat in terms of the controls, it is a very simplistic type of game. It's the exact type of combat you would expect in a game like this, where at least the fundamentals of it are very much Souls-like. So what I mean by that is that you obviously press circle for dodge, you have R1 to block and then take less damage, but you can also use that to parry and then stagger an enemy. And that is pretty much the same way you would describe a game like Dark Souls, for example, or Elden Ring. So it is very similar in that sense, but essentially that comparison ends right there because the rest of the gameplay is definitely very different compared to a game like Dark Souls or Elden Ring. Now, something that instantly differentiates this game is that you do have two different types of attacks that aren't necessarily programmed to any specific button. Instead, you've actually got two different attack types, that being your operator mode as well as the Punisher mode. Now, operator mode is essentially just the normal mode. That's the mode you're going to be in pretty much the majority of the time that you're playing, and that's the mode that you start in. This one just has the regular types of attacks that are obviously done by pressing square, and it just deals a regular amount of damage at a regular pace. Now, you can, however, switch to what is called Punisher mode by pressing a triangle at any time during combat. This will actually make you a tad slower, especially when it comes to just your general movement speed, and your attacks are a little bit slower too, at least depending on the character, but you deal a decent amount more damage. Now, it kind of depends on the enemy type that you're facing as to which one of these is the best to use in any given situation. So it's something that you want to toy around with when you get your hands on the game and just kind of get a feel for which type of attack works against which type of enemy. For example, if there are enemies that attack you really quickly, then it is probably best to just use the operator mode or the regular mode. Whereas against maybe slower or bulkier enemies, it is probably best to actually kind of match them and use the Punisher mode. But again, it does vary. So it is something you're going to just have to learn on the fly. Some of those bulkier enemies may actually be better attacked in the operator mode and vice versa. So it's not necessarily either way set in stone. And that is part of the fun of the game, is that you kind of just have to learn these as you go. And it can become a bit of a challenge, especially against different boss types and stuff like that. Now, something else in this game that is definitely a little bit different compared to most other games of this type that I've played is the enemy health bars. Now, the health bar is the thicker bar at the top there. That is obviously pretty standard, and that's what I'm sure everyone is going to expect. But the bar underneath is actually the stagger bar. I initially thought this was like a shield bar or something like that, but it is your stagger bar. And so this will fill up the more you attack that enemy. And once this becomes full, it will actually stagger the enemy, and that will kind of just leave them like incapacitated and they're just laying there on the ground, allowing you to hit them. And in most cases, at least for the easier enemies in the game anyway, this will just allow you to pretty much kill them before they will ever fight back. Now, obviously with a boss, generally they will come back to their regular mode before you've taken all of their health and stuff like that. So it's not necessarily going to guarantee that you're going to win that fight, but against those regular enemies, I guess the more common enemies in the game, once you have staggered them, then they may as well be dead, because at that point you are definitely going to deal enough damage to kill them before they ever return to their normal mode and are able to deal damage back to you. Now, something else in this game that is a little bit different than a lot of other games of this ilk, it's not very different compared to other Final Fantasy games, because this is a big key part of the gameplay in these type of games, especially Final Fantasy VII Remake and Final Fantasy XVI. This is the ability to actually use abilities and spells by using tactical mode. So by pressing X while you're in combat, that will then open up tactical mode. You can see it down in the bottom left. It's actually like a menu that opens up while you're in combat. And like I said, it allows you to use abilities, spells, and items such as your healing potions, for example. And I do believe you can access the new synergy attacks from here too, but it is the slower way of doing so. So I'll touch on that in just a second. Now, each character has their own set of abilities, and these will obviously grow and also get stronger as we progress through the game too. And to use these abilities, you do need to have a full ATB meter, which you can see in the bottom right under your health bar. It's the 2 blue bars there. And like I said, you do have 2 of them. So you can charge and use 2 of these separately, or you can use 2 at the same time. Or later on, once we are stronger, I have no doubt there will be abilities that are way more powerful, but they come at the cost of both of these users. Now, spells are pretty much the same thing, really. They just deal different types of damage. So you can deal like frost damage and fire damage and stuff like that. But the spells are pretty much explained in the exact same way as the abilities. So I won't bother, I guess, reiterating that I've just gone through. You can consider them pretty much the exact same as using abilities. Now, another element to the combat is something called limit breaks. And over on the right of your health bar, you can see your limit meter. Now, once this meter fills up, you can then use a deadly sort of finisher type attack that again does vary for each character. So everyone has their own limit break attacks. And this is accessed through the same menu where your abilities and spells are. So again, just by pressing X, you can pull that up. And if that limit meter is full, you can use your limit break attack. These are absolutely insane, and at least in the demo, I've only actually been able to use this maybe once or twice throughout that entire playtime, so it's not something you can do all the time. It does take quite some time for that limit meter to fill up, but trust me, you definitely want to be using it when you can, especially in boss fights and stuff like that. These are going to be absolutely crucial, at least on those harder difficulties. Now, something else to the gameplay is that occasionally enemies will actually bind you, meaning that you can't actually do anything and you'll need to switch to another character and attack that enemy to free the character who was initially bound. Sounds like a bit of a mouthful, but essentially you can just get pretty much frozen by enemies. They'll kind of grab onto you and then you will be forced to switch a character, and all you need to do in that situation is just go over to the character who is bound, and by hitting the enemy who is holding that character, that will just free them, and at which point you can obviously switch back to them if you want, or continue to let them be an NPC. Now, lastly, the big new addition to this game when it comes to the combat is what's called synergy attacks. These are a very new addition to the game that weren't in the original Final Fantasy VII on PS1, and they also weren't in the remake as well, so it is completely new to the franchise. And this is essentially a double team combo, or kind of like a finisher type of attack that allows you to deal massive damage to enemies, often in really, really cool ways, and each character will have multiple different synergy attack options, with every single other character all unique to each character as far as I know. What I mean by that is that your synergy attacks between, say, Cloud and Barret will be different than your attacks between Cloud and Tifa, for example. The attacks that they do, the amount of damage they deal, the type of damage in terms of sometimes it might be fire damage and stuff like that. And it's all different between each individual character. And it's not only between Cloud and other characters. It can be, for example, like I said, Barret and Tifa, they can have their own synergy attacks between each other. So there is going to be plenty of these awesome attacks that we can do. And it's going to be very fun to figure out which are our favorites. To do these, all you need to do is hold R1, which is obviously the block button, and when you are then blocking, if you look down in the bottom left, you just want to press whichever option you want that kind of corresponds to those attacks. This will then allow you to do these synergy attacks, and it, like I said, is a very fun and new addition to the game that is not only going to really increase the quality of the combat, but it also makes the game look a hell of a lot more cinematic, because these kind of play like in a little animation, and some of them look absolutely mental, as we've seen in the state of play earlier in February. But that is pretty much it for the fundamentals and the basics of the combat in Final Fantasy VII Rebirth. Let me know if I missed anything, or leave any other useful info in the comments for anyone who's reading the comments, and hopefully this helps you guys out when it comes to actually playing the game at launch, giving us all a bit of a head start on the combat, seeing as we have been able to play the demo a few weeks early. Thank you all very much for watching. You guys have a great day, and I'll catch you all in the next one.